she is crouching at the edge of the tree line, naked, caked in mud, not standing, not walking, moving on all fours, like something that had forgotten or never learned what it meant to be human. The man who set the trap was expecting an animal stealing rice from his lunchbox. What emerged from the brush of the Ratanakiri jungle on January 13th, 2007, was a woman, picking grains from the dirt with her fingers and pressing them into her mouth. She made no words, only grunting sounds. Her spine was hunched into a permanent crouch. When she was hungry, she rubbed her stomach. When she was thirsty, she pointed at her mouth. Her eyes, when she finally looked up at the men surrounding her, registered nothing. Not fear, not recognition. The local police, in an official document, described her using 4 words that no incident report should ever require: half human, half animal. Survival experts later stated plainly, a lone 8-year-old girl, no tools, no shelter, no knowledge of the terrain, cannot survive in that jungle, not for a week. The Ratanakiri canopy is so dense that sunlight reaches the forest floor for approximately 3 hours a day. The trails flood for months during monsoon season. The province is home to cobras, pythons, and Indo-Chinese tigers. The arithmetic of survival in that environment does not produce a living adult 19 years later. And yet, that is the official story. A girl lost in 1988, a woman found in 2007. But before we get there, before we reach the doctor's reports, the DNA tests that were refused, and the detail that blew this case open 9 years later, we need to understand what Ratanakiri looked like the morning everything began. Ratanakiri Province, northeastern Cambodia, a place so remote that the roads stop before you reach it. The jungle here is not the romantic kind, not the green cathedral of ferns and filtered light that travelers photograph. It is something older, something indifferent. The canopy is so dense that sunlight reaches the forest floor for approximately 3 hours a day, arriving in thin gray slats, like light leaking through the bars of a cell. The air is liquid with humidity. The undergrowth tears at skin. The soil is soft and red and absorbs everything: sound, footsteps, the evidence of anything that has passed through. Experts who analyze the survival question put it plainly: a lone child, an 8-year-old girl with no tools, no shelter, no knowledge of how to find food or clean water in that terrain, could not survive there. Not for a week. Certainly not for 19 years. And yet, the woman the villagers had caught was 27 years old. That is the arithmetic, if you accept the story. 8 years old in 1988. 19 years in the jungle. 27 when they pulled her from the tree line. But mathematics and reality do not always cooperate. And the longer investigators, doctors, and journalists examined this case, the more the numbers began to crack. The morning she disappeared was ordinary in the way that last mornings always are. Ratanakiri in 1988 was a province still bleeding from 2 decades of civil war. The Penang people who lived there were small farmers and buffalo herders on land the jungle perpetually tried to reclaim. Life was simple. Simple in the way that hard lives are simple. Waking before dawn, working until dusk, sleeping when the jungle permitted it. Rochom was the eldest daughter, 8 years old. Old enough in that place and time to take the water buffalo out to graze near the jungle's edge, a task she had done before, unremarkable. Her 6-year-old sister went with her that day, the way children do when the day feels like just another day. Neither of them came back. Her 6-year-old sister was lost on the same day and has never been found. That detail lives in a single sentence in the official record and then disappears, unremarked upon. But hold it. 2 children, same day, same direction. One returns 19 years later, unable to speak. One never returns at all. The jungle swallowed them both and gave back only one. For Sao Lu, the years after 1988 were years of not knowing. He searched, he asked, he waited. At some point, no one records exactly when, he stopped expecting her back. You don't announce that you've given up hope for a missing child. You just stop saying their name every day. The capture, because that is the correct word, was fast and chaotic. The villager who laid the trap called others. A small group surrounded the woman at the tree line. She tried to run back into the jungle. They caught her. She did not scream. She did not beg. She made sounds no one present could identify. A low, rhythmic grunting that one witness later described as the sound a cornered animal makes when it understands that escape is no longer possible. Word spread with the particular speed that news travels in isolated places. And that is when Sao Lu arrived. He pushed through the crowd. He looked at her face, the face of a woman who looked nothing and everything like the child he remembered. He reached for her arm. He turned it over. The scar was there. A pale, raised ridge of old tissue, exactly where he remembered the knife accident that had happened before she vanished. He wept. Her brother Rochom grabbed her arm and said, "I saw the scar right away, and I knew that she is my sister. I was the one who caused the injury." He was crying. The woman sat still as stone, while tears rolled down his face. She looked at him with eyes that registered nothing. Not recognition, not fear. Nothing. The days that followed were witnessed by journalists who traveled to LICADHO from across the world. What they found was not romantic. It was not triumphant. It was deeply, quietly disturbing. The family watched her around the clock to prevent her fleeing back to the jungle, which she attempted several times. Her mother constantly had to pull her clothes back on. She ate by grabbing food and shoveling it with both hands, the way something eats when it has spent years competing for survival. She would not use a bed. At night, she became agitated, restless, moving through the dark hut, making low sounds as though responding to something none of them could hear. A Spanish psychologist who traveled to evaluate her found some responses. She smiled at her reflection in a mirror, reacted to a game involving toy animals. But she did not speak. 3 words emerged, according to local police: father, mother, and stomach ache. 3 words in 19 years. 3 small, stubborn fragments of a human life that refused to fully dissolve. And then a reporter from The Guardian arrived. And the reporter looked at the woman the way a journalist is trained to look. Carefully, skeptically, without the emotional weight of a father's grief. And the reporter noticed something that had been visible the entire time, sitting in plain sight since the moment she was pulled from the jungle. Something no one had wanted to name. Deep scars on her left wrist and ankle. The kind that form when something, a rope, a chain, a restraint, is worn against skin long enough that the tissue below learns to compensate. The kind that say, this person was not free. this person was held. And her feet. 19 years of barefoot jungle terrain should produce feet that are almost unrecognizable, thick with calluses, deeply cracked, deformed by decades of pressure. Her feet looked soft, normal. The feet of someone who had not walked barefoot in the jungle for 19 years. LICADHO, the Cambodian human rights organization, did not use measured language. Their assessment was direct. We believe that this woman is a victim of some kind of torture, maybe sexual or physical. Not a theory offered gently. A belief, based on evidence physically present on her body. So let us sit with what we now have. A woman who crawls. A woman who cannot speak. A woman whose body bears the marks of restraint. Feet too smooth for a jungle life. Scars too specific for an accidental one. And a family who, when asked to submit to DNA testing that would resolve everything, withdrew their consent. The one test that could have answered every question was refused. And the question that opens underneath that fact is one that no one wanted to ask aloud. Why? The search for an explanation divides into two territories, one that science can touch, and one it cannot. The first is cognitive. Psychologists who study extreme isolation have a framework for what happens to the brain when language acquisition is interrupted at a critical window. The window closes. The architecture that processes and produces language is physically altered by deprivation. Jeannie Wiley, the American girl isolated in Los Angeles from 1957 until her discovery at age 13, could eventually learn words. But her grammar never fully formed. The brain had already decided, during those silent years, how much room to allocate to language. And it had decided very little. For a woman who may have lost access to human speech as a child, replaced by what exactly? Reintegration was not a matter of weeks. It was a matter of whether the brain could be convinced, late, to rebuild what deprivation had dismantled. Most evidence suggests it cannot, not fully, not to the point of explaining what happened. The second territory is the one the evidence on her body points toward, and it is darker than any jungle. The scars on the wrist and ankle, the soft feet, the behavior of someone traumatized, not simply feral. The Guardian's reporters and human rights investigators did not believe she had spent 19 years roaming free in the wild. They believed she had been held, somewhere, by someone, and that at some point she had been released or had escaped, and that between her place of captivity and the jungle's edge, her mind had completed a transition. Her body had been forced into gradually, over years. She had stopped being a person and become something else. But there is a third layer. A layer that emerged 9 years later and that detonates everything that came before it. In 2016, a man named Pell came forward to say Rochom was his daughter Tak from the neighboring Gia Lai province of Vietnam. He had recognized her from photographs on Facebook. He arrived with 9 family members, documentation, and photographs. The adoptive family agreed. The likeness was too strong to argue. His daughter had not disappeared in 1988. She had disappeared in 2006, 1 year before she was found at the jungle's edge. After a mental breakdown, the Cambodian family agreed to return her. Both families held a ceremony and sacrificed a pig to the land spirits to guide her home. The man thought to be her biological father paid $1,500 for the years of care. and the woman the world had known as Rochom was taken back to Vietnam, which means she was not Rochom. She never was. The real Rochom, the 8-year-old girl who walked into the Ratanakiri jungle in 1988 with her 6-year-old sister, remains missing to this day. Neither has ever been found. So what do we have? A woman who was not who anyone thought she was, scars that indicate captivity, feet that contradict the story, a DNA test refused and then rendered moot, a family that mourned a girl for 19 years, then cared for a stranger, then surrendered her, because the girl they actually lost was never found. And at the center of everything, a woman named Tak, who spent a year in or near the Cambodian jungle following a mental breakdown and emerged so profoundly altered that she could not communicate, could not stand upright, could not tolerate clothing or the presence of other people without dissolving into animal panic. 1 year, not 19. 1. The jungle, the isolation, the hunger, the heat, the absence of language, the absence of a mirror in which to recognize yourself, does not require decades to remake a human being. It requires only that the brain be placed in conditions it was not designed to survive and left there long enough to make a catastrophic decision. Stop being what you were. Become something that can survive this. What no one has answered is the question of the scars. If Tak disappeared in 2006 following a mental breakdown, then what left those marks on her wrists and ankles? Rope, chain, something looped and tightened and worn long enough to scar. A mental breakdown does not produce bilateral restraint scars. A year of solitary jungle survival does not produce them. Something else produces them. Something with hands. And then there is the detail that sits most quietly in all the documentation. What if the behaviors that looked feral, the crawling, the grunting, the terror of clothing, the refusal of upright posture, were not the product of living wild, but of being kept in conditions where those behaviors were the only ones permitted, or the only ones that were safe? A person kept in a space too low to stand in learns to move on all fours. A person kept in silence loses language. A person kept in isolation loses the architecture of self. Not because the jungle took it, because a person did. Today, the jungle of Ratanakiri still stands. Sal Lu, who wept over a scar and called a stranger his daughter, died in 2013. His wife Rochom, suffering from debilitating cataracts she could not afford to treat, spent her final, caregiving years locking the woman in a cage-like hut to keep her safe. No electricity, no floor, a woman eating and sleeping and waiting on bare wood. Given a name that wasn't hers, living in a box. The woman is in Vietnam now. Whether the year in the jungle, or wherever she was before it, has begun to release its hold on her brain is not documented in any source available. She stepped off the public record the moment her Vietnamese family closed around her, and the world moved on. The real Rochom remains where she has always been, somewhere in the Ratanakiri jungle, or not. The jungle does not say. It absorbs. It reconfigures. It takes an 8-year-old girl and her 6-year-old sister on an ordinary morning in 1988, and it keeps them, and it offers nothing back. The most disturbing question in this case is not whether the jungle can reprogram a human being. We have seen that it can. We have seen what 1 year of extreme isolation does to the grammar of the body, the syntax of behavior, the vocabulary of the self. The most disturbing question is simpler and older and has no answer. What happened to the real girl? The one who actually went into the jungle in 1988. The one whose name was borrowed for a decade by a stranger and then given back to an absence. The jungle of Ratanakiri is still there. The trees do not know her name. That is the thing about old forests. They have held so many secrets for so long that one more child is not even a weight they register. She is just part of the dark, part of the silence, part of what the jungle does to everything that enters and does not leave. If you think the jungle is the most frightening thing in this story, you haven't been paying attention. The jungle is just a place, indifferent, ancient, vast. It doesn't choose its victims. It doesn't plan. It doesn't restrain anyone's wrists. Something else did that. Something that walked on 2 legs. Something that had a name. And that something has never been found either. But what happens when the predator that strips a person of their humanity isn't the wilderness, but something organized, something with rules, a structure? What happens when the force that dismantles a human being isn't indifferent, but deliberate? When the pack that does the breaking is not made of animals, but of men who chose to become them? That is the question the next case asks. Because in Europe, cold, civilized, modern Europe, there are packs, there are hierarchies, and there are children who walk into them the way Rochom walked into that jungle, without knowing what kind of forest they have entered.